Historical fiction allows the reader to transpose themselves into a different time period and explore that world through fictional yet authentic characters, often inspired from real life. It gives the reader a sense of familiarity with times they might not even have been born in yet, while offering a deeper understanding of important events that shaped that time period. One of the things that I love the most about this genre is that it concentrates on the human condition. While we can learn the facts from history books, in fiction, we usually get to see those facts from a more sensitive perspective. Some of the most touching historical fiction books I have ever read were those set during World War II. There is something about this period that, despite all the darkness and all the tragedy surrounding it, draws me to its stories which, on the one hand, make me wonder how such calamities could take place, and on the other, make me really grateful for the life I live. Anthony Doerr once said that a friend told him, if we were to take all the books written about World War II, tear their pages apart and drop them onto Germany, they would cover it entirely. And yet, he felt the need to write another one. 8 sounds like such a tiny number when I think of all the stories worth reading, and yet I can barely hold them. These are my favorite historical fiction books about World War II that I have read until now, and I have to warn you, these are super emotional and I cannot guarantee that you will not cry while reading them. Since I mentioned Anthony Doerr, I could not start this list with other book than All the Light We Cannot See. What I knew about the story is that it follows the lives of Marie-Laurent, a blind girl since the age of 6 living in Paris, and a boy called Werner from Germany. I was already quick to judge in my simple interpretation that the title alludes to a metaphor about blind people who, despite living in darkness, are not deprived of inner light. Well, let me tell you something. I was not prepared to read this book. It is so beautifully written, it oozes sensitivity, art, and lyrical prose that just make it impossible to put it down. There are so many allegories in its pages that I felt quite embarrassed by my poor and obvious initial judgment. Is it right to do something just because everyone else is doing it? Open your eyes and see what you can with them before they close forever. I discovered all the light we cannot see in the people that were trying to live their lives despite a war that was consuming everything around them. I discovered it in the places that were offering refuge and safety, in the warm-hearted people with good intention, in the innocence of children, and in the future that everybody was seeking. I discovered the light in the purity of a first love and in the hope that everything will end up well. And I came to realize that no matter how much I read, I am still and forever will be blind to so many stories. Blindness has many forms. It can be because of loss of sight, but it can also be because of limited vision, either chosen or altered by external circumstances. Radio during the war was a powerful instrument of awareness. People were risking their lives to find out the truth and to connect with one another, while others were using it as a means of manipulation and propaganda. I believe today we have social media for that. In love, we find out who we want to be. In war, we find out who we are. This is the opening line of The Nightingale by Kristin, and I knew from the very start that I would love this book. I read about courage, sacrifice, suffering, and scarcity, but I also read about unconditional love, either romantic, familial, compassionate, or patriotic. The narrative transposes us into occupied France during World War II, an unrecognizable France, submissive, where any act of rebellion is harshly punished. We follow the story of two sisters, Vienne and Isabel, that have to find their own ways of surviving in this cruel world that war has brought upon them. I loved this book because it brings into perspective the lives of women during times of war, vulnerable women that are all of a sudden alone, while their husbands, sons, uncles, fathers are gone to fight an enemy that nobody foresaw and nobody wished to have. I was introduced to so many remarkable people that proved their heroism by defending what they believed in, by fighting for freedom with every atom in their body. People without whom I believe that the Allies' victory would have not been possible. We also find such remarkable characters in my next pick, which is a beautiful tangle of fiction and non-fiction. The Paris Secret, written by Natasha Lester, is a thoroughly researched book filled with lots of real historical events. She was inspired to write this book when she learned about Catherine Doerr, sister of the famous Christian Dior, who was part of the French resistance until she was eventually captured in 1944 and locked at Ravensbrück. Natasha Lester brought to light her story that was otherwise poorly documented. She was also inspired to write about women in the Women Auxiliary Air Force and their essential role in this organization, and also about their struggle to overcome discrimination, with emphasis on the constant need to prove their competence and worth in a male-dominated environment. Her third inspiration came from a secret squadron that was flying only during nights to minimize their exposure and only during full moons for better visibility, and in their missions they were dropping and collecting special agents who infiltrated Nazi groups. Basically, everybody was risking their lives. I do appreciate the lengths that these authors go to do their research and to bring these books to us. Natasha Lester took these three major inspirations and intertwined them in a narrative that transports us in both space and time. From pre-war rural England, where childhood seemed so simple and innocent, to France during World War II, where a radical transition was made, and even to Australia 2 generations later, in a present that cannot easily escape its past. The Paris Secret is a complex and nuanced tale about sacrifice, loyalty, love, and family, all in the context of a war that still has so many untold stories. A few heartbeats, that was life. A heartbeat followed by another heartbeat. A breath followed by another breath. One moment followed another moment, until you reached the last one. The Violinist of Auschwitz, written by Ellie Midwood, is another great example of fiction inspired from real life. It tells the story of Alma Rosé, an Austrian violinist with Jewish roots. Like many others, she ended up at the concentration camp in Auschwitz. I was deeply moved by her story and extremely grateful that I got the chance to discover it. Alma Rosé was a woman with a strong personality, a sensitive artist, and an intelligent person who, once she realized the power she could obtain with her talents, she used them in order to help and save countless lives. It was many years ago when I said that I will never want to visit Auschwitz. Not because I choose to stay blind to the atrocities committed there, but because I am afraid I cannot bear it. And it was extremely difficult for me to read this book. I spent a few good hours mentally traveling to that place and being emotionally wrecked by how its prisoners had lived, dehumanized, stripped of any purpose and meaning, taken away from their families, and having no prospect of another tomorrow. But then I was also filled with hope to see how those exact same prisoners cared for one another, showed kindness and compassion to one another, united by the same suffering and the same desire for survival. I believe that The Book Thief, written by Markus Zusak, needs no introduction. I haven't seen the movie yet and I only read the book recently, but let me tell you something. This is not your typical World War II story. It is not even a typical book. Most of the time I was under the impression that I was reading more a poem than a novel, and I had to read between the lines to truly understand the significance of seemingly simple black on white words that hid so many nuanced meanings. Our narrator is that itself who has never been so busy. I loved this creative choice of giving that human traits and to make it the most sensitive character of the book. I wanted to tell the book thief many things about beauty and brutality. But what could I tell her about those things that she didn't already know? I wanted to explain that I am constantly overestimating and underestimating the human race, that rarely do I ever simply estimate it. I wanted to ask her how the same thing could be so ugly and so glorious, and its words and stories so damning and brilliant. This is not a story focused on how Jews were persecuted or how Allies struggled to win the war. Markus Zusak chose to tell a different story, a story that follows the lives of ordinary people living in a small and quite poor town in Germany between 1939 and 1943. We do not even get to see the end of the war because this is not its purpose. We all know how it ended. The purpose is to get to know these people. We often look back at these times and wonder how people could be so blind, so brainwashed, how they could be part of humanity's most brutal actions against itself. How could they not care and stand for what was right? And this is one of the saddest and most enraging facts that I personally cannot understand or accept. Words are a powerful tool. They can enlighten us or doom us to a world of darkness. This book makes a very important statement. The war was not started with arms or weapons, but with words. Hitler's speech was rotten from the very start, but it worked on too many people. I will make a small parenthesis here and quote Audrey Hepburn, who said, "A quality education has the power to transform societies in a single generation, provide children with the protection they need from the hazards of poverty, labor, exploitation, and disease, and give them the knowledge, skills, and confidence to reach their full potential." And I strongly believe in that. I believe that education is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, means of shaping our society. Unfortunately, there are those who do not want their people educated, or those that simply cannot afford it. I will not start this discussion here as I can go on for 2 hours straight and I will still have a lot more to say. What I want to say is that it's important to read these books. It is important to practice critical thinking, and it is also important to speak up and reject hate speech. While The Book Thief is revealing people that did not speak up or stand for their beliefs, in Daughter of the Reich, Louise Fein wrote about those that overcame manipulation and propaganda, a powerful title that intrigues us to find the story behind. The book follows the story of one character, Hetty Heinrich, but it could represent the drama of all those daughters and sons that were raised in a certain way of thinking and living, only to eventually find out how corrupt and sinister their upbringing really was. I followed Hetty's inner conflict and confusion breathlessly, her constant pondering on what was right or wrong, whom to trust and whom not. And I rooted for her to make the right choice, no matter how difficult it seemed to be. And I see Vati's newspaper finally for what it is. Not news, but manipulation of thought and mind. Another book largely inspired by real people and real events is Lilac Girls, written by Martha Hall Kelly, to the point that 2 out of the 3 main characters were real people that had lived those times and those events. I discovered yet another of the many unsung stories that history has still to reveal. This time I read about the tragedy of women prisoners from Ravensbrück that were used as guinea pigs for medical experiments, all in the name of science and, of course, for the well-being of the Reich. It's a heartbreaking story that makes us wonder again how it was possible for such things to happen. Thus we have the perspective of indoctrinated people oblivious to the truth and void of any compassion. But then we also have the people that did everything in their power to help and save the unfortunate and doomed. The lilac from the title, that is also present throughout the book, stands as a symbol of hope and survival. This magnificent flower that blooms after a harsh winter, a beautifully crafted metaphor about enduring hardship and starting over. One last book I want to recommend is Daughters of War, written by Dinah Jefferies. Set in 1944, it tells the story of 3 sisters living peacefully in a small village in Nazi-occupied France, until their lives are drastically altered by a ruthless war that didn't spare even the most hidden corners of Europe and beyond. I like the fact that the book was highly focused on the characters, their feelings, relationships, and the places they lived in. A profound narrative that allowed me, as a reader, to get an in-depth perspective of how war affected the lives of ordinary people and how they struggled in order to survive. The story of these 3 sisters could have been the story of any other family. The end of the war is not portrayed in the book, but it is referenced by the period when Nazis started to fail and things didn't work anymore in their favor. Again, we all know how it ended for them. I appreciated this choice of teasing the end with the optimism that people started to feel, that optimism that gave them strength to move forward day after day. I hope I inspired you with my list, and now I would like very much to know your thoughts and to welcome your recommendations of the books you loved the most. Thank you for staying with me, wish you a wonderful day, and see you next time.